Hi everyone, and welcome to the video where we will be making the homemade biscuits that will pair with the gravy we just made if you're following along in order. And so I do want to go over all of the ingredients and then we'll go through the step-by-step instructions. So if you look at the recipe that was sent to you, we will need 2 cups of all-purpose flour, which I have here, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 2 teaspoons of sugar. We will need 1/4 teaspoon of salt. We will need a cup of milk, and then 1/2 of a cup of butter melted, which I have already here made. And for the butter I just use unsalted butter. And then you will also need 2 tablespoons of butter that is melted, and this is going to go on the biscuits after. And so once you have all your ingredients ready to go, we will move on to now cooking the homemade biscuits. So for the first step, we will preheat the oven to 450 degrees. Lightly grease or spray a baking sheet, and then you'll just set it aside. So this is the baking sheet I'm going to use today. And you can really use anything to spray. Today I'm going to use olive oil cooking spray. And I'm just going to spray the pan so it is covered in this, but not too much. So now my pan is lightly greased, and I'm just going to set it aside for now. All right, step number 2. In a large bowl, whisk together flour, baking powder, sugar, and salt. So we'll start with in a large bowl. So find a large bowl in your kitchen that you can use for this. We will whisk together flour. And so in the instructions, it does say we will need 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And so everyone's measuring cups look differently. Mine that I'm using today actually holds 2 cups. And so I already poured in 2 cups of my flour, as you can see here. And it's really important that you want to be very precise with this. So make sure you are at 2 cups. And then you will pour this into the bowl. The next step, we want to mix together our baking powder. So if we look back at the instructions, for baking powder, we have 1 tablespoon. So for a tablespoon, this is my measuring utensil I'm gonna use. And you can see here it says 1 tablespoon. So I'm going to use my baking soda. And if you watched my last video, I gave you guys a little tip. Whenever you are pouring things into your utensils, you want to put down a napkin or a plate to make sure that anything falls off. It's not actually going into your mixture, because then your ingredients and the portions are going to be off. So I have my plate here again, and I'm going to pour 1 tablespoon of baking powder onto my measuring tool. And again, it's really important that you do get just the right amount, not too much, not too less. And you can see I did get, it's white so it's hard to see, but I did have quite a bit actually fall on here. And so you can just throw the extra in the trash, or you can put it back into your container if you would like to save it. And so now that I have 1 tablespoon of my baking powder soda, I'm going to put that into the mixture. We now need sugar. So the recipe says 2 teaspoons of sugar. So I have, my measurement is 1 teaspoon, so I'm just going to do 2 of these of sugar. And for this, instead of pouring this whole bag onto here, I'm just gonna scoop it out, try to make sure it's level, and I'll do 2 scoops, so that equals 2 teaspoons. So there's 1. And there's 2. So after the sugar, it says to add salt. If I look back, it says 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. So I actually have a measuring tool that says that exact measurement. And so I'm going to take my salt and I'm just going to pour it on here and then add it to the bowl. Alright, so I have all the ingredients that it asks to put in a large bowl for step number 2, and then it just asks it to whisk it together. So this is my whisk I will be using today, and I'm just going to stir that up for a few seconds, make sure it's all blended together. Since it's just pretty much all powder and really light, it's pretty easy to mix. So I'm done with that. Step number 3, mix in butter and milk until barely combined. So I'm going to take my melted butter, and again, the melted butter is 1/2 of a cup. And so you can see here, right here is 1 cup. And so I did 1/2 a cup of butter, melted it. You can melt this in your microwave, on the stove, whichever you prefer. And you're gonna add that to the mix. And then it also asks you to mix in the milk as well. So the recipe does call for 1 cup of milk. So it looks like I am at 1 cup of milk, and I'm going to pour this in. So right now, everything I just added is just sitting on all the flour and the sugar and the salt and the baking powder, everything we added. And it does say, mix butter and milk until barely combined. The key to light and fluffy biscuits is to not mix them too much. If you handle the dough too much, the biscuits will become tough. So I am only going to stir this very little. I'm just kind of going along the edges to get the liquid I just added in there. You can use a whisk, you can use a spoon, anything you have that will just lightly blend it together. And again, not too much, but you do want to make sure you have no powder left. Get the edges and the bottom, and it looks pretty good to me. So you can see here, everything is mixed together. I have no more liquid or solids like the flour. Everything is blended together really well now. Step number 4, with a spoon, scoop and drop balls of batter onto the prepared baking sheet. Leave about 2 inches between each biscuit. So again, my baking sheet. Here's my spoon that I'm going to be using. It's not a really small spoon, it's about a medium size, I would say. And I'm going to take a scoop. So about that much. And you're going to kind of roll it into a ball and set that onto your pan. And so it actually was pretty sticky on my hands. You could put some oil or something on your hands or butter, but I'm just going to use the spoon and just kind of push it off onto my pan since I don't really want to add anything else to this recipe right now. So again, about 2 inches from each other. So you do want to make sure that they are all about the same size so that they will cook the same. If you have some smaller, some bigger, they will cook differently. So I do recommend trying to make them the same size. So as you can see here, this is about how many I fit on my pan. So I have 8 on my pan right now. And I do have about half the batter left. And so I will put in another pan as well because I don't want them to come together and touch each other. And so the next step is going to be step number 5, bake for 10 to 12 minutes until lightly golden brown. And so I'm actually at 450 right now. And so I'm gonna go ahead and put these in the oven for 10 to 12 minutes. I will probably do 10 minutes, check them at 10 minutes to see what they look like, and if I feel they need a little bit more time, I will then just watch it very closely until it gets up to 12 minutes. All right, so I set it for 10 minutes. I'm gonna let it cook for 10 minutes and then I will come back, check it, and once it's done, I will move to the next step. All right, so 10 minutes is about up. So I'm going to check my oven to see how the biscuits are looking. Be sure to use a towel or an oven mitt to grab your pan so you don't burn yourself. And these actually look done. So we are good to move on to the next step. And so I do want to show you what the biscuits look like so far. So you can see these are going to be lightly bronzed. So depending on how you like your biscuits, you can overcook them a little. If you like them not as brown, I would recommend staying closer to the 10-minute range. A little browner, I would go ahead and do 12 minutes. So I am now going to add all of my biscuits onto this plate because then for the next step, I'm going to brush the melted butter that I had earlier onto all the biscuits. And so I'm just going to put them all on here with my spatula. And so they're all on a plate now. The next step is to go ahead and take your butter, and I'm going to use this cooking utensil to just brush it over my biscuits. And this is only half my batch. I do have a few more biscuits I need to put in the oven, and so you do want to make sure you save some butter for the rest of your biscuits. So I'm going to set this here. And the next step is to add your gravy and enjoy. And so I do have my gravy on low. If you were following the steps in order and did the gravy before the biscuits, do keep in mind your gravy, or at least mine, it became pretty thick just sitting there. I had it on low, and then I did turn it off for a little. And so I added just a few splashes of milk to it, and it definitely helped the texture become a little less thick. And so I'm gonna go ahead and mix this, and I'm going to put it on top of my biscuits and gravy. So I do want to show you, it's kind of hard to see, but that's going to be my gravy. It's all mixed together. And it's the consistency that I am looking for. So I'm going to take 2 of my biscuits, put it on my plate. Add the gravy with the sausage on top, and look how yummy that looks. I hope you all enjoyed this recipe, and now I'm gonna enjoy some yummy biscuits and gravy.